In this lesson, we'll continue to talk about working with objects in Cinema 4D. So here's where we left off. We've got our two primitive objects here, and we have the attributes available to change those objects here in our Attributes Manager. But to be able to do any sort of complex modeling with these objects, we need to convert these into a polygon object. And so there are a few ways that we can do that. We can right-click on the object and go to Make Editable. We can hit C on our keyboard, or we can hit this button right over here, Make Object Editable. So let's go ahead and do that on the oil tank, and we'll see how that changes not only here in our 3D view, but also in the Objects Manager. So we'll make that object editable. You can see the handles go away. The appearance of the polygons themselves don't change, but the icon over here changes into a triangle, and you can see that under the Attributes Manager, we don't have any of those object attributes anymore to be able to modify. We just have those common attributes from basic coordinates and then the Phong shading. And so now what we can do is, instead of using the Use Model tool to access the entire model, we can access the points using the Point tool. So if I want to now grab one of these points, I can do that and go over here and change to a live selection. It will allow me to just click on those points. Okay. If I use the Edge tool, I can click on the edges and select those. Same thing with polygons. I can click on those. Okay. Live selection will allow you to actually just kind of paint across here. Okay. You can see that only Select Visible Elements is turned on, and so nothing on the back side has been selected. If I turn this selection off, these only select visible, and go back in and select polygons, you can see that I'm actually selecting on both sides. So that's something definitely to be aware of when you're selecting. The same thing goes for working with something like rectangular selection. If I click and drag across here, you can see that I am selecting everything from front to back. So if I only want to select what's up front, I'll do that, and then the back polygons won't be selected. Now if we come up here to the side, you'll notice if I click and drag across these polygons, they're not being selected. And that's because we don't have tolerant selection on. If I were to click and drag across the entire polygon so that it's all encompassed within the rectangular marquee, it will select them. But if I turn on tolerant selection, I can just go across the middle and select those. Okay, so I don't have to come across the whole thing. So depending on how you like to select your objects and different pieces of your objects, you can change these settings to your liking. Okay, go back to our live selection. All right, so we can go through, we can select our points. Okay, we can select edges. If we want to select a loop of edges, we can go to Selection, Loop Selection, or hit U and L in quick succession. We can select our loops. Go to our Polygon tool, we can select loops of polygons as well. And so this allows us to access all of the pieces of our polygon model instead of working with it as a primitive shape. So primitives give us more flexibility in changing the attributes of our objects very quickly, but we don't have any ability to modify that object from the basic shape that that particular primitive can achieve. Okay, so we can't create any really complex models from that primitive, but we do have a lot of flexibility over the specific attributes that are available. Okay, so looking at this, we can modify this. If we want to change this, we would just hit C or convert that, and now we'd be able to modify that as well. Now we also have the ability to create splines and geometry from those splines apart from our polygon primitives. So I'm going to just delete these, and let's go into the right hand view, and right next to our primitives, let's look at the splines. And so there are a number of splines. I'm going to just go with freehand right now and click and sort of draw out a line here, and you can see now that we have a line with a few points on it. So the same thing applies here. If we go back in, I can, using the Point tool, I can select a particular point and move it around. Now this spline really has no geometry associated with it. It's just a line basically, but we could use it to create other geometry. So this particular spline, if we take a look here in the attributes, is a Bezier type spline. We can change this if we want to make it linear. You can see how that has pointed lines there. We can turn it into a cubic spline. Okay, and so there are a number of options in here. This is more of what you may be thinking of as a NURBS curve. Okay, we also have the intermediate points, which changes how the smoothing occurs between the points. Okay, for our purposes though, this will work fine. So we've got one spline here. We'll go into our perspective view. You can see we have a single spline. So these splines we can really start to use to create geometry with generators. So to copy an object, I'm going to go up in the Objects Manager. I'm just going to hold down Control and drag this down. And that's enabling me to make a duplicate of this. So we'll go ahead and just drag this apart. So now we have two splines. Okay, and so to actually start to create some geometry, we can go in here to our generators and we'll create a loft NURBS. Now as we drop this in our Objects Manager, you'll notice that nothing has happened. This is where our hierarchy workflow comes in. In order to create objects with the deformers, the generators, and so forth, we have to utilize the hierarchy. So in this case, we want our splines to be children of the loft NURBS. So we'll click on this and just drag it underneath. You can see we have a single spline there, and now we'll drag this one underneath as well. And so now we have these two splines parented underneath this loft NURBS, and the loft NURBS is creating geometry automatically between those. You can see that geometry there. If we want to take any of these splines and manipulate the points, you can see I can do that and the geometry updates. So there's an ongoing connection between the two splines and the loft NURBS. You can see that we have attributes for the loft NURBS that we're able to change. You can change the mesh subdivisions along the U and along the V. Okay, we can also cap it in some cases, and there are other options here, but those are the basic options. Okay, now if we want to turn off the visibility, we can just turn that off. If we just want to turn off the loft, we can still see the splines underneath. We just click on the little check. Okay, now we can also come in and let's go ahead and grab one of these splines and just Control drag to pull it out. And this time we will create a ready-made spline. So let's create a, well, I'll just create a star. Okay, so we've got a star spline that we're able to create, and we can go into the attributes and we can change the inner and outer radius. Okay, and so think of this as much like a primitive. We've got all these attributes that we're able to change here. Okay, and we'll change that twist back. We can change the plane on which it's drawn and so forth. But let's take a look at another type of object that we can create. So instead of a loft, let's create a sweep NURBS. So we've got the sweep NURBS here. Again, nothing has been created yet. So let's go ahead and drag the star and the spline copy underneath the sweep NURBS. And so now what it's doing, it's taking the star and sweeping that geometry across this spline. So if we go into the sweep NURBS, you can see that we have now attributes for that particular sweep NURBS. Now we aren't touching the star, we aren't touching the spline, so this is really a nice workflow. It's very flexible, non-destructive. You can work with your splines and your objects and still be able to have control over many of the attributes of those. Now we can change the, for instance, the rotation as it comes to the end. We can make it twist a little bit. We can change the growth. So if we want it to kind of not go all the way out, you know, these are things that can be animated as well. If we want to change the scale, we want to have it be a little bit smaller as it comes out. All of these things we can control with the attributes of the sweep, and just we're using a star in this case. Now it's very easy to swap this out. For instance, if we wanted to create a circle and drop the circle in, get rid of the star, you can see that now we've replaced that. The sweep NURBS attributes are the same, but now instead of using a star, we're using a circle shape. Okay, so using splines with these generators is going to be very powerful as you start building your geometry here in Cinema 4D. Now one other thing that I want to look at here before we go is using the hyper NURBS and maybe look at a deformer. So if we go ahead and bring in a cube, okay, and let's go to our model tool, just bring this up a little bit. And let's say we want to now smooth this cube. Let's bring in a HyperNURBS. If we drop the cube under the HyperNURBS, you can see that now it's smoothing that cube. We can turn off the effect by clicking on the little check, but basically it's using the Catmull-Clark subdivision method to subdivide this cube. We can go ahead and change our levels that it's subdividing here in the editor and in the renderer. Okay. And so now we have a smoothed cube here, but we can still go back and modify the initial cube. It's not a polygon surface, it still has all of the data in there. We can also go in and add, let's say, a bend to it. And so if we take our bend, you can see how we can start to bend our geometry. Okay? So deformers are going to allow us to do that. Now if I go ahead and pull both of these out of this, you can see that I want the deformer to be either a child of the cube, or if in the case of being in a HyperNURBS, it's actually a child of the HyperNURBS. It's at the same level as the cube to be able to manipulate that. Okay? And so we can take our bend, move our cube up to the top. And so this hierarchy workflow is going to be very powerful for you as you start to get in and do some modeling with this. So now that we've taken a look at some objects and working with objects here in Cinema 4D, should be a little bit more familiar with that now. Let's start to work, take a look at working with materials in Cinema 4D. So we'll do that next.